How good was lunch? How good was lunch? That was outstanding. Big thank you to the caterers. Actually been a really beautifully catered event and a lovely opportunity to stand and have some conversations. Welcome back to session 3, day 2, T-Tech 22, accelerating to zero. And we're going to kickstart this session with a conversation and an update from the team at Waka Kotahi, New Zealand Transport Agency. We'll have 3 speakers in this segment. Caroline, Ian and Yogesh are going to present on each of their respective areas of practice. There'll be an opportunity at the end of each of their sessions for questions. We love a good challenging question. And I'm specifically guided that you should not hold back from asking questions, because sometimes we can feel risk when we're dealing with large agencies. We think, oh gosh, I might need them. They want questions, right? So please don't hold back, bring them on. Caroline Dumas is going to speak first. She's here to talk about the One Network framework. With a career spanning more than 20 years across strategy development and implementation, project and program management, and operational risk management right around the world, including the UK, Nigeria, and of course now here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Caroline has worked with a range of industries and functions in the private and public sector, including transport, aviation, 3 waters, and oil and gas. She's a qualified benefits management practitioner and was also a commissioned officer in Her Majesty's Armed Forces. She holds an MBA and a BSc in Earth Sciences and is passionate about making a difference and improving systems. She sees the land transport system as a vital component to a successful Aotearoa, New Zealand. Will you please welcome Caroline to the stage?
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Caroline Dumas, the One Network Framework Program Lead at the agency. And today I'm going to talk you through the One Network Framework, what it is, how we're implementing it, and how it ties into future transport and ITS systems. So in terms of strategic context, the use of technology in the transport system is key to our future-proofing for our future systems. All of these require frameworks and tools that naturally lead us to more interdisciplinary planning and systems thinking, so that whole of systems approach really underpins the One Network framework. So the purpose of this is to introduce our new movement in place framework, the One Network framework, and explain how the application of it aligns to future transport and ITS. So, introducing the framework. ONF draws on best practice from several local and overseas movement in place frameworks, including those used by Transport for London, the City of Toronto, Vic Roads, and a number of other Australian movement in place frameworks, and also Auckland Transport. Traditionally, roads and streets were considered as movement corridors to get us from A to B. And we know that actually things have now progressed, and many of our roads are constrained by existing infrastructure, which means we need to consider how our roads and corridors can meet growing demand without actually building more. So we needed a new approach to classify our network that enables better design, improved planning and delivery of a modern transport system to meet the needs of increasing needs of people, business, communities, and of course our climate. So Waka Kotahi's new classification approach, the One Network framework, recognises that streets not only keep people and goods moving, but they're also places for people to live, work and enjoy. As well as, safety is an important element in that as well. So the ONF is really designed to facilitate improving our road safety and building more vibrant and livable communities. Movement in place as a concept has many uses at the strategic network planning level down to the detailed project level in terms of implementation. And it marries network-wide and local considerations. And at its heart, it organises transport links by their placement movement roles into road and street types. So the diagram you can see on the slide is our actual framework. It's on a movement in place grid split into a rural and an urban component, which is determined by the land use designation. So some of you may be aware of ONF's predecessor, which was the One Network Road classification. That was solely a movement-based classification. So this basically is the new and improved version, which brings in movement and place together, and it has a range of uses which are fairly broad across our system. So based on that movement and place concept, the ONF places people and place at the heart of our planning and investment by determining how important place is and how transport can serve it. And often a lot of us in this space, there's the big conversation about should, transport be supportive of housing density and vice versa, but it's thinking about how transport-orientated demand and all those factors go into it. So it also, as well as movement and place, it gives us the ability to classify our modes of walking, cycling, public transport, freight, and general traffic. And that's really important for that all-of-systems approach. So thinking about moving people and goods rather than just vehicles on our network. So it's that underlying tool which inputs into a range of things. So our street categories themselves, I won't take you through all of these, we haven't got time, but essentially when we look at our urban areas, our transit corridors, it's pretty indicative of what they are, all the pictures demonstrate that, but every single council in New Zealand has classified their current state networks using the One Network framework. And what that's done is that's given them a baseline to actually understand what are their movement and place considerations, what does that look like from a function perspective, so that actually then enables them to start thinking about the needs of that network function from a technology perspective, investment perspective, how they maintain it, how they operate it, and how they can improve it over time. So that's where we're at the moment, and the next phase of implementing the One Network framework is to think about the future state, and that's the beauty of it, and again, that's where that technology piece will come into play to support that. But just on the grid, a lot of movement and place frameworks from a global perspective generally have some sort of movement and place grid, whether it be 3x3 or 5x5. We've chosen 5x5 for urban and the 3x5 for our rural network. Rural network, as you can imagine, is a little bit simpler and the place values aren't quite as high, but it's still important to distinguish the different functions you have on a rural and an urban network. So at a high level, your street family is your urban and a rural, and then councils actually figured out their movement and place rankings, and this is where that data component is so important because they can only do that with accurate and up-to-date data and information. So I will talk shortly about how we're tying into other initiatives which support this development. But basically, ONF itself is broken down into our street categories and our modes that underpin that. And councils at the moment are busy classifying their modal networks to ONF as well. So soon they will have a complete ONF classification. Now, in terms of our ITS standards, ONF touches a variety of different systems, tools and processes, not just internally at the agency, but also in council systems. So we are part of the Road to Zero initiative. ONF is a feature of our new speed management guide in terms of movement and place. I'm going to talk about the ITS specifications shortly, but it's covered everything from high-level strategic planning, thinking about our future networks, to how we use ONF in our investment decision-making and our benefits framework. So essentially, every function can have a little lens of ONF either as an inputting driver to information going forward. So focusing on Waka Kotahi's ITS specifications, I do feel like a total fraud talking to you guys about this. You know far more about this than I do. But essentially, our specifications define the requirements for the design, delivery, integration of our ITS equipment and systems on our national transport network. As part of the new ITS framework, the core requirement standards have recently been updated, and a couple of you in this room have actually been heavily involved. So you know who you are, I won't sing you out. But essentially, this standard will be used as guidance for our road controlling authorities going forward and our traffic operations centres to deliver and maintain our customer levels of service. Safety, maintainability, security design guidance is also included. So this document is in draft. I believe it's shortly to be released by us for broader consultation. But essentially, as you can see on there, each ONF classification has those ITS specifications attached to it now. So our main streets will have, the following specifications that we will follow for our state highway network. And I believe we will also be working with councils to encourage them to adopt the same standards. So we've got that all of systems approach, and we're not segregating our state highways and our local roads, because actually our communities generally don't really care who maintains it and operates it, as long as they get that level of service they're looking for. So being that customer focus in mind is really important for us. So I just wanted to share that. And then finally, I thought I'd bring out how ONF and future transport touches. So these are just broad considerations, and really the purpose is to give you an example of where ONF as a framework and a tool can be used. And I won't go through all of these, but there's a couple I wanted to highlight. But from the conversations and presentations this morning, I can see some really clear alignment points to all of this work. So, and someone raised a very good question about, well, vehicles are the problem, and actually the technology solutions, they work hand in hand. By our councils and ourselves as an agency classifying our road network using ONF, we get that thinking early on in the piece before you have the dollar conversation about what you can and can't do. So you understand your movement and your place considerations for now and into the future. And actually, the application of some of these touch points helps drive that. The asset management and data standard is really important to us, and we're working really closely with them, because making sure we're aligned from that underground asset point of view to the ONF stuff, which is the above ground, is really key. So we've got a huge opportunity in front of us to actually bring forward movement in place and technology in future transport, and how that can actually work together. So I'm quite excited about what's coming for us, not just for the agency, but for the broader sector. We're also doing a lot of work with our geospatial systems internally, so actually enabling better access, better use, and aligning systems where possible so things actually make sense, and that usability is there, and enabling that future-proofing of those systems. And we've got a lot to build on, I won't lie, but by continuing to have this focus of that technology and data perspective, gives us a really strong platform for new technologies and how we can actually constantly improve and actually be forward-minded in that regard. So that is all I've got for you today. It was a pretty quick skate through, I will appreciate, but I guess the key thing is our movement in place framework and approach is here to stay, and the opportunities to bring forward that future transport systems thinking and how we actually build our technology into that is pretty exciting. So thank you very much.
We've got a question mic at the front of the room, and I thought it was at the back of the room. Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you for agreeing to take questions from the audience. I'll just grab the necessary hardware. Who's got a question? One at the back there would be, wouldn't it? Right back where I started.
Oh, sorry, I should have taken that to you.
Absolutely nothing to do with you. Entirely my fault. Here we go. Here we go. Questions here. Gareth, it is yours, sir.
Thanks for that. It was really, really cool to see. On the sort of low-level side of things, does the individual street categorisation with geometry exist somewhere? Is that going to be released?
So with geometries for street categories? Yeah,
so if I went up and looked at a particular street, can I then go and see the 1F NF classification?
Yes.
I had a scoot through the website, I couldn't see
it.
Yeah,
no, yes is the short answer. So what we've done with street geometries and I guess that urban design element is we've fed the ONF into our new Aotearoa Urban and Street Guide Design Guidance, sorry, wrong name. So if you have a look at that, and we do have that linked, we've actually literally just last week updated our website. It's down at the bottom, and that's got indicative street widths for street categories. Yes.
Wonderful. Forgive me, I saw another question over this side. There you are, and then I'll come to you, Seth. Thank you. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for that. It's a good framework, and it's great to see the ITS specifications coming through. Question around the movement side of things. In Europe, M4 and M5 and a lot of M3 has all 30 k's an hour. Is Waka Kotahi got a process to look into that? And a related question, you call it movement. Are you looking at pedestrian, cycle, micromobility and traffic, or is it just a traffic and place framework?
Okay, so I can answer that in two parts. The first answer to your question, are Waka Kotahi looking at street categories and speed limit ranges? The answer is yes. So we have fed in movement and place information using the ONF into our new speed management guide, and that's linked in Megamaps. So each ONF street classification has an indicative range. Say a main street might be between 20 and 40, for example, and then councils can pick up that information, use the other requirements as per the new rule to actually determine their new speed limit. So it's been produced to guide speed management planning going forward. The other component to your question around, sorry, you're going to have to remind me because I got
was it just traffic?
Walking, cycling, yeah, movement. So yes, when we add our modes to the network, they've got to think beyond just, you know, what are the movement of vehicles, because that wouldn't give you all the information you need. So in terms of adding in your walking networks, what are the movement components to that? Each of the modes have got a different, I think there's four classifications within, say, walking 1 to walking 4, and that's got movement indicators in there, so councils can actually go, okay, that's over, you know, 10,000 a day movement, bi-directional movement, that's going to be a walking 1 for us, for example. So yes.
Nice one. We've got a question here.
Hi, Caroline. My question is, I guess my experience, I work in the technology operations team at Waka Kotahi, and historically, I feel like we've not been great at consistency, regardless of the road classifications about what ITS is applied. So how do we, maybe this is a bit of an internal question, but I'll ask anyway, how do we consistently within NZTA, I guess, get transport services projects, alliances, applying the same kind of lens using this new framework, and instead of going, oh, this, I don't know, is in this part of the country, so we're not going to be consistent regardless of it.
No, good question, and I think the key for us is the One Network framework is a national level framework. So we want it to, it's been applied nationally, and that is for ourselves as an RCA as well. We've got to make sure, and that is the purpose of my role and my team, to actually embed the ONF into all tools and systems and processes, from our network outcomes contracts with our operating performance measures, for yourselves, looking at making sure you understand the different classifications and what they mean. So there's more to do. It's not going to be it's not a 6-month gig. It's going to take years to fully embed, absolutely, but it's got to be done nationally. Otherwise, we can't see the benefits. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause, Caroline Dumas. Next in our Waka Kotahi update, we have Ian Leach, Lead Advisor, Safety Camera Operations. Ian has more than 18 years' experience in the sector across both New Zealand and the UK. During his career, he's carried out roles in road maintenance, transport operations, traffic engineering, and roadside technology. He's worked on a number of key ITS projects here in New Zealand, including Auckland ramp signalling, journey time signs, tolling, average speed, and distracted driver trials. He's currently working on the Waka Kotahi safety camera program as a lead advisor. Let's welcome him to the stage.
Tēnā koutou. My name is Ian Leach. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm here today to talk about the safety camera system program, which I joined 2 months ago, so not too many hard questions at the end, please. There you go. First, the green button. There you go. So first I'd like to talk about Road to Zero. Road to Zero is New Zealand's strategy to reduce the road deaths by 40% by the year 2030. The strategy takes the safe system approach, acknowledging that we must address all parts of the technology transport system to achieve the desired reduction in deaths and serious injuries. Along with the strategy, the action plan was launched, detailing 15 initial actions. One of these was tackling unsafe speeds. So I can't see the slides because I need my glasses. Excuse me 2 seconds. That's better. So part of this unsafe speeds package is introducing a new framework for speed management, transitioning to lower speeds around schools, which we have already seen in Auckland with a number of our roads near schools dropping to 30 k's an hour, adopting a new approach to road safety cameras to reduce excessive speeds on our roads, and as part of the safety camera network, the infringement processing system will be transferred to Kotahi from the police. So the road safety literature shows that for every 1% drop in the mean speed, we should get about 4% of drop in fatalities. We kill over 300 people a year on our roads, so reducing the speeds is critical to reducing that number. So Whakatairanga splits our part into two programs, the speed management program and the safety camera systems program, which I'll talk to you about today. So we're going to introduce a new approach to safety cameras in Aotearoa. So we're transferring the existing cameras from the police and significantly expanding the network of cameras. We're establishing a new organisation designed within Whakatairanga to manage this new system, and we're introducing new infringement processing and associated improvements and automatic image processing as well. Currently, all of the speed fines sent in New Zealand, and there's 1 million of them, are all manually processed, each one. Each picture is looked at manually, the number plate taken, and then the infringement sent. So we're going to be establishing a best practice approach to operations, including using new camera technology, such as average speed, also known as point-to-point, and a mixed mode of signed and unsigned cameras. So currently, none of the speed cameras in New Zealand safety cameras in New Zealand are signed. So when we take over the cameras, we'll be signposting all of the fixed cameras. But we will be using a mixed approach. So there'll still be unsigned mobile safety vans around the country. And this is because in Sweden, where they sign all their safety cameras, they found that it worked in the areas where there was cameras, but when there's no cameras, people just started speeding again. We'll also be doing a penalties review. So this is to increase fines. So currently the fines range from as low as $30, and that's not really an incentive not to speed. We're also looking at whether we can get demerit points for safety cameras, which is the same as other countries. Because at the moment people just see, sometimes they see it's just a toll. I'm going fast, I just get a fine in the post. So what are we delivering as part of this program? So there's quite a lot going on. There's 3 big pieces of work. So the first part is transferring everything from the police to Whakatairanga, which is a big piece of work on its own. Secondly, we're putting in a new back-end system to cope with the processing. The current system used by the police is very antiquated, and that is also a significant piece of work. Plus, we're looking at installing another 100 safety cameras around the country. That's nearly doubling the number of cameras we've got. So over the last quarter, key internal and procurement activities have been completed to support the delivery of the core activities of the programme. Some specific examples include considering camera locations, setting of the speed limit rule has been started. We're looking at the average speed, electronic service and process automation side of things in the regulatory environment, because currently, as I said, everything is manual, so we need to change legislation to allow more automation of the incoming data from the cameras. We started off the penalties review, and for the next NLT period, safety cameras will be integrated into the process for developing speed management plans around the country. So the current state, so the police have 135 safety cameras, 36 red light, 50 static and 43 mobile operation, and they dish out 1 million fines per year. And remember, these are all manually done. So they've got 90 FTEs processing all of these fines. There's also an additional 70 FTEs who man the mobile camera fleet. So as we move towards 2030, we're going to increase the number of cameras from 135 to over 500 safety cameras, up to 300 red light cameras, 200 static speed, 95 mobile operations, and 150 average speed camera zones. So average speed camera zones are extremely effective in other countries around the world, so we're hoping to get the same results here. We're also looking at new technologies, like dual function speed and red light cameras. So the people who see the amber and put their foot down to try and get through won't get the red light fine, but they'll get a speeding fine instead. We're looking at legislating the average speed, but also we're doing looking at distracted driver and seatbelt automation of fines for those. So I've got some examples here of a technology that we're trialling currently on the Auckland motorway network. The pictures are from Australia, but they're very similar to the ones that we're seeing at the moment. So here's a guy driving along, hand on the wheel, one hand on the phone. And so we've got 2 sites in Auckland, one on State Highway 1, one on State Highway 16, and they're covering 2 lanes each. So we're seeing 1,000 of these offences every day at each of the sites, which is a lot of people. And that's just at 2 sites. Here's another good one. The guy's got no hands on the wheel, just texting, going 85 k's an hour down the road. Here's another good one. At least he's getting some help to drive, this guy. But again, he's going 80 k's an hour down the road and no hands on the steering wheel and no attention to what's going on in front of him. So our colleagues in Australia are doing some really good things in pushing the boundaries of what can be done. So this one station here can do average speed, it can do the detection of seatbelts, the detection of distracted driving, plus spot speed, all in one unit. So they're trialling these around the country, and this is something we may be looking for later as we progress through the program. Cool, that's me. Any questions?
I tell you what, I very much doubt that we can say 1,000 offences a day and not get a question from this audience. Here's our first from Shaun.
Ian, sorry to put my glasses on. So at the moment, obviously the police are also administering other red light cameras and so forth for other RCAs. Will you guys start processing all of them, or will you just be getting the sites off the state highways?
I believe we will be, but I'm not exactly sure, so I might have to come back to you on that.
Cool. And the other question was, will you also be installing on non-state highways, so the mobile speed cameras and maybe the red light cameras, safety cameras?
Yes, definitely. I've just been, earlier this month, went through 10 sites in Auckland, all on the AT roads, where we're looking at putting new spot speed cameras in.
Cool, that sounds great.
Right, we're travelling. Here you go, there's a question here, I believe. Thank you so much.
Hi, yeah, the Hamilton motorway's just opened with a 110 speed limit, and it just seems to be heading in a different direction than what you're saying. I'm wondering, where do the speed limits stop, or are we trying to bring those general highway limits down as well?
So that's probably a question better for the people who are dealing with the speed limits on the roads, but I can give you what I believe is the answer, which is we are looking at appropriate speeds for roads. So where we've got a safe road that's designed at 110 k's, we can make it 110 k's, but other roads which are 100 k's currently and dangerous, we're putting those down to 80. So it's appropriate speeds for appropriate road designs.
Kia ora. Is there a way that you could tie in offences like cell phone and so employers, when they check a driver's licence, can see that there's an issue if there's been offences and support their staff? Like when you do a driver check, you know, we can see if there's been other offences and a criminal record check.
I expect there is a way, but again, I'm probably not the right person to answer that question, I'm afraid.
I just had, like, if you've ever seen the movie Brazil, I just felt a little bit of it run down my spine. Terrifying. Don't do that, people, said the citizen.
One of the interesting things here is always separating practical realities, resourcing limits from the theoretical ideal. So say we magically gave you a solution that with near perfection instantly identified every case for speeding in real time across all of New Zealand. Would that actually help you, or would it be so politically and societally unacceptable that you wouldn't be able to use it?
So ultimately, we want to get safe speeds on our roads. I'm surprised no one's asked me a question about revenue gathering. So ultimately, if our system was working correctly, we would have zero revenue, and that would be a success, because it would give us safe speeds on the roads and reduce our DSIs. With regards to your question, I don't know. So it's like Big Brother, a bit like Brazil, as has just been mentioned. I don't think people would be happy with all their speed permanently being displayed and instant pinging of tickets. So, yeah, don't know, I'm afraid.
Hi.
Yep.
I think that they released the news recently, and those ones in Queensland that you showed up are raising about almost $1 million a day from people not using their seatbelt and not using their phone. So just to add a bit more context to how much it is. And there is a bit of backlash about revenue raising, but when the photo is so blatant like that, yeah, I think it's good support for what you're doing. So
well, those two sites alone, if we were sending fines for $2,000 a day, that's a lot of money.
I bet there are some people in this room who could help you spend it, though.
Well,
so,
those,
I'll tell you what,
those two sites on the Auckland motorway could probably fund all of the maintenance for the Auckland motorways.
Look, as a concerned citizen, like the cell phone use, I don't know about you guys, it drives me absolutely potty when you see people driving along distracted, way more than an extra couple of kilometres an hour. That's I know you guys have got the data, but I look at it and just want to tear my hair out, so find the buggers. That's what I think. There you go. Cool. Great, good on you. Any other questions? Any other questions around the room? We've got one here. That'll be our last one for you. Fantastic. Here we go.
Just following up on the automated vehicle discussion earlier, if someone's driving an AV using their phone, is that okay? Oh. And how do you know? Oh,
nice. That's cool.
Again, a very good question that I don't know the answer to, so something that we need to consider. Thank you.
They don't exist. They don't exist yet. They don't exist yet. Folks, put your hands together. Ian Leach.
Thank you.
Continuing our Waka Kotahi theme, Yogesh Anand, I suspect, needs little introduction, Chief Technology Officer at Waka Kotahi, an accomplished technology leader with time spent as a CIO and a CISO, with over 25 years of senior management experience across public and private organisations, including large multinationals. Previously CTO at Waka Kotahi, accountable for management and delivery of digital solutions, including corporate, regulatory and transport technologies, leading a large team of over 300 to deliver transformative solutions. What a pleasure to have you here. Put your hands together. Welcome Yogesh to the stage.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's quite interesting because just previous discussion that was taking place around the speed cameras. I was involved in that program early on, and there was lots of discussion around what happens with the data and how do you use that in terms of driver education. And when you sort of start talking about the automated vehicle as to how do you actually use this data to potentially control the speeds, etc. So, you know, if you think about the evolution, then you can potentially get to a stage where you don't necessarily need to issue fines because you can essentially stop the vehicles from going fast. But coming back to my topic, so my name is Yogesh Anand. As I mentioned, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Waka Kotahi, but realistically in my current role is the executive sponsor and the delivery lead for the national ticketing solution. I'm delighted to be here because we've reached a significant milestone with this program of work. This program of work has been in place, I'm told, predates me by several years, started back in 2007. Several attempts were made to get this going, but they were not successful. However, now the last iteration of that program, we've got to a stage where we are about to sort of move into the delivery mode, so I'm delighted to be able to talk a little bit about that. I also understand that two of the themes that were discussed earlier today were around equity and collaboration. And I want to sort of perhaps start with the fact that this program is, if I can get this thing to work, this program is very much about collaboration. This is a collaboration between 14 participants. There are 13 public transport agencies and Waka Kotahi. And as you will see from the names on the slideshow, that there are the size of these participants vary. Hence, it's taken a lot of time for us to make sure that we can understand the requirements, the needs, and as to what each individual entity is looking for, and capture that and make sure that we can deliver a program that is going to be fit for purpose in this space. It is also, whilst it's a ticketing solution, it is very much about increasing the use of travel by public transport. It's providing a modern ticketing solution. And the idea being that if we can remove the barriers for people to travel, and when I talk about barriers, I'm referring to things like, for instance, I live in Wellington. I have a snapper card, which is what I use for public transport. I come up to Auckland, and I'm up here reasonably frequently. I need to get a hop card to be able to travel on public transport. And to be perfectly honest, and I've had this conversation with my colleagues at AT, sometimes I have struggled to find places where I can buy a hop card. And then you get to a point where it's just too inconvenient and you just move on and you say, forget it, I'm not going to use public transport. So it's about how do you actually remove some of those barriers to make it easier for people to be able to use public transport. It's also about if we can encourage more people to use public transport, then it starts reducing congestion on the road, which then goes towards the safety goals that we have. But it also helps reduce our emission reduction, supports that part of it, which is also a good outcome here. One of the other themes that I understand that's been discussed is around data. Obviously, this allows us to collect lots of data about how services are being consumed, and that allows us to then essentially develop, and I know there's lots of debate at the moment about routes and things like that, cancel buses through to other challenges, allows us to then optimize our services accordingly and do it at a local level so we understand exactly what's required or what needs to be done. So why now? Well, as I said, this started back in 2007. But more realistically, more recently, where we've got to is that a lot of the solutions and the systems that are currently in place, they're obviously not integrated, as I mentioned. You have HOP, you have Snapper, you have Metro, you have B cards across the different parts of the country. It does require, and the systems are at different state. Some are sort of past their use-by date. Some have limitations in terms of how far you can expand them. Hence, it's a good opportunity to sort of look at, can we do something in that space? One of the obviously other challenges are around that in order to use the current systems, you have to top up beforehand. You pay first, then you use the services. And they are also not as flexible in terms of allowing us as to how the services can be optimized from our perspective. One of the things we've discovered over COVID is that generally across the world, but particularly in New Zealand, we have become accustomed to using PayWave. And more our customers are demanding, why can't we have similar sort of technologies across in other parts of the ecosystem, including in terms of the transport services we are providing. And then obviously there is a partnership for scale. Now, as I mentioned in the very first slide, that we have 14 participants, of which there are 10 regional councils that are relatively small. And for them to be able to afford a state-of-the-art solution is very, very challenging. Hence, by pulling all our resources together into a single solution, single model, we've been able to achieve that and provide an equitable solution across the country. So how does the system work? Very simply. You get on a bus, as you would today. You tap your credit card or a debit card. If you can't if you don't have a debit or a credit card, like there will be lots of people who don't like those things, or children who need to carry, there is a sort of a similar sort of to the system we have now, a debit card, like a prepaid card. You use that, you tag on. When you leave, you tag off. It doesn't charge your card straight away. It basically accumulates all your travel trips during the day. And at the end of the evening, it applies business rules, which can be simple as that, for instance, some councils might decide that the maximum you can be charged in a day is $5. Then it'll accumulate all your travel. even if though you have traveled 50 times, it'll just charge you $5. Whereas with the current system, every time you tag on, you tag off, money is taken off your systems. What that does is it obviously makes it easier for consumers, allows us to provide some concessions and apply different types of fare types, and also it provides an account for individuals, those who want to register. You can also register yourself with these systems, similar to I think a lot of people do on the in Auckland on the 80 hop system, and then you can add concessions to that. And concessions can vary from that, you have a super gold card, or you're a university student, or you're a child, those types of things, and you can apply those and makes it easier. So it allows us to manage this in a central back office, in a single place across the country. That means there is a lot of consistency that's available through that. Some of the benefits, I've obviously sort of talked about some of the stuff. There is improved customer experience that people are using essentially what they used to, tag on, tag off. You can use the same device. You can move across the country. It doesn't matter. You don't need to buy a new card every time you go to a new place. As I mentioned, it also allows people to we talk about the term of mode shift, allowing people to move away from existing, to different transport mechanisms and supporting a greater use of public transport. Data, better insights and flexibilities, which means that we can essentially optimize the travel public transport network and look at where the needs are, where the demand is, at what time the demand exists, and optimize a delivery of services accordingly. And that data is available to the public transport agencies for them to be able to do the analysis. Value for money, what that is saying is essentially that rather than buying 14 different systems across the country, we're buying a single solution. We are buying single hardware, and one of the options that we have with that hardware is that we can essentially move that hardware around as and when. If a hardware is essentially the things you tag onto, the validators that you tag onto in the bus or the train, if that breaks down, you can, if you don't have it in, I don't know, in Palmerston North, you can get it from Auckland, because it's the same hardware essentially. That allows us economies of scale from that side of things. Easier to integrate with new technologies, and one of the things with the account-based system is that, and I sort of cover that off I suppose in the next slide. Account-based system allows you to integrate with other types of options that might be available. And we've sort of talked about a little bit about the health and safety side of things, which is around, the idea is that we want to move away from cash to the extent possible. Cash management is challenging, and also during COVID, a lot of PTAs had stopped taking cash, and I think some are still not taking cash for public transport utilization, and so it allows us to do that. And it supports the tracing part of it, if that's how we want to use it, but keeping in mind the privacy impacts associated with that. We have the opportunities to integrate with other national and transport initiatives. And so services like MaaS, and I know there was some discussion around MaaS. Account-based solution provides that capability. It doesn't provide the MaaS solution, but it allows that capability for us to be able to utilize that for the first and the last mile. When we start talking about tolling or congestion charging, those types of services, it allows us to do that, as well as provide dynamic fare pricing, that during the day we can shift fares as required based on the demand and the supply of the services. I'm conscious of time, that we are running out of time. So basically, one of the things that we are doing differently is that it's being centrally funded. The whole program is being funded out of the National Land Transport Fund. And that's been predominantly done to simplify the arrangements that we are putting in place with our partner. So we have Kotahi becomes the primary contracting agency. So we are contracting with the ticketing services provider, the financial services provider, and any other entities that are required. We are bearing all the operating costs, but the fare revenue goes back to the public transport agencies. And what that does is it avoids duplication of investment, and that also allows us to manage all of the sort of management of the ticketing solution to be done centrally in a consistent way across the board. As I mentioned, we sort of had a fairly major milestone recently. Literally 10 days ago, we signed a contract with our preferred ticketing services provider, no longer preferred, but our ticketing service provider, Cubic Transportation Systems. They're actually also in the room today. And that was something that was hosted by Minister Wood, and the actual signing ceremony was held at the Britomart train station on the 21st. And the reason we are sort of confident that we can be successful is because the partner that we have chosen is someone who has a lot of experience in this space. They have deployed this same solution or a similar solution in a lot of other jurisdictions. The closest to us is Brisbane. They're currently implementing that in that part. But if you look at the Oyster card in London, the solution, they're implementing Omni in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Boston, to name a few. And we are sort of, the advantage that we have is we are able to leverage what they've learned from those installations, implementations, and apply that in our context and make sure that we are successful. The only way that can work is by making sure that we have very, very strong partnership. And one of the things sort of I talked earlier on about equity, and that's partly through the account-based system. It provides sort of an opportunity for us to also apply equity across for our consumers in that space as well. So it requires strong partnership with our public transport agencies, and obviously we've also spent, as I mentioned, a lot of time discussing as to what that looks like, putting in place the standardized governance arrangements, the management arrangements that we need to have to ensure that we are delivering solutions in an effective way and managing those solutions in an effective way through the central organization that we are standing up. The first deployment will be in Canterbury, scheduled for mid-2024, but there may be some other pilots, etc., that we might run in other parts of the country prior to that to give people a flavor of what's to come. Thank you very much. That's all I wanted to cover today.
As someone who travels around this country, that is music to my ears. Thank you. There will be a load of questions. I've got time for 3, so they need to be burning hot, brilliant questions, and we're starting here, Shaun. I'm absolutely confident.
Please, no hard questions.
Bring them on.
Thanks so much. I work for Smart Track, and we're looking at trip planning and pushing people out from the corporate environment into public transport. How are you going to manage the financial reimbursement for account stuff for businesses? Because I'm concerned that that's just going to create lots of, finance team members, explosions to deal with the reimbursement.
So one of the options is, especially with the account-based system, and we're currently currently a design phase of that. One of the options, and this is actually quite a good question in the context of equity as well, because one of the options that is available is to provide a portal to the employers to actually load information or provide incentives directly onto the individual's accounts. So that is absolutely an option that we are looking to explore.
So my question is about family travel. You showed a lovely picture of a family traveling there, and I'm imagining myself trying to get on the bus and using one card to pay for 3 or 4 different people. How is that handled? So
I understand that you can do up to 4 taps with one card, so family of 4. And the only challenge with that at the moment is that, and we're slowly working through the design process, as I mentioned, the only challenge, as I understand it, is that if there are concessions that are available, then that obviously applies to the main card holder. So it is possible, but we're just not entirely clear at this stage as to how that would work with regards to, especially when you've got children, making sure that your children are not being charged full fare. But the capability exists.
Kia ora, great to be able to see this actually happening. It's been a long time coming to see this across nationally, so congratulations on bringing it together.
Thank you.
A question in regards to the learnings that we can do from research on the trips that occur and potentially trip purposes around the country, and also in terms of desert areas that don't have public transport, whether that is going to be made open source in terms of data to be able to actually look at obviously data protocols.
Yes, of course. So obviously privacy is a very significant component of this because we are a custodian of quite a significant data set here. We will be making the data available, as per the legislation in terms of the open data source, whatever we need to. The PTAs to some extent will sort of define what the rules are in that space as to what is made available to them for them to consume and make available to their partners. Also, we are working with them to determine the rules around what can we make available at a national level.
One here for you, sir.
You spoke briefly that a MaaS type integration is outside the initial scope of the project. By the time this project comes online, New Zealand will have maybe 10,000 shared e-bikes and scooters and 500 plus shared cars integrated in other ways. How can we get them into the system?
So whilst, and perhaps being a very good delivery individual, I'm very focused on scope. So making sure that we deliver what we've set out to achieve. What we have agreed is that after we have gone live with the first tranche, which is essentially Canterbury, that we would start looking at the plans for what the future holds for this. And I know that there is a lot of interest in MaaS type capabilities, the first mile, last mile, as to how we ensure. And particularly from a moored shift perspective, we want to look at that as well and sort of encourage people to get that. So it hasn't been forgotten. It's just that from my perspective, I want to make sure that I deliver what I've been set out to deliver.
Yogesh, thank you so much. Put your hands together, folks. Thank you. And folks, look, I'm interested to know whether you agree, actually, but I would just say, like, we've just had 3 presentations, all from Waka Kotahi, every one of them articulate, top of their game, brilliantly presented. Can I just absolutely acknowledge the team? Thank you for sharing so openly and so professionally and for your clear mahi in this space. It's a lovely thing to see. Thank you so much. Next up on the stage, we have Puti Wilson, Principal Advisor Pou Whakatairanga at MBIE. Puti has a background in environmental management, statistics and strategy, and with degrees in science, postgrad qualifications in politics and environmental management. Her main interests are the well-being of Māori communities and in particular marae. She's a member of her runanga, Ngāti Hinemanu me Ngāti Paki, forgive me. She's also an expert witness for the Waitangi Tribunal, as well as various agencies such as the Ministry of Transport, Statistics New Zealand, and local government. She's presently employed by MBIE as Principal Advisor within Te Whakatairanga Service Delivery. Puti, welcome to the stage.
Nā mihi kia koutou. E ko ana kia koutou nākau e tai mai aho, e tēnei rā, e runga, e te karanga, e pānui o te rā. Welcome to this session, which will be about transport technologies, sustainability and partnering with Māori. Ko waio, who am I? Ko Aorangi Tamonga, ko hautapu mea rangatiki nā awa. Ko Ngāti Karanuni, ko Ngāti Raukawa, ko Ngāti Tuwhare Toa, nā iwi. Ko Ngāti Hinemanu, me Ngāti Paki nā hapu, noa winiata ki taihapi au te marae. Hei mahi ana he apore Pou Whakatairanga mō Ministry for Business Innovation and Employment. Ko Puti Wilson tōku ingoa. So you may ask, what has this got to do with us being here today? And what I'm going to be taking you on is a little bit of a journey about how we're needing to develop capability to understand what te ao Māori. So what I've just introduced, many of you probably know as a pepeha, which is really important, one of the first stages of understanding Māori values and ways of connecting. And without this, you can't achieve partnership, is basically what I'm suggesting. Oh, there it is. I didn't know. Okay, so this is a little bit about me. This is the marae that I grew up in when I was just a little child, and is a very important place for me. It is where I make connections and is the way that I go forward into the world. given the other speakers that I've heard today, what I'm suggesting in regard to partnership and what we're advocating within MBIE is actually a possible disruptor to a lot of the work programs that you're currently doing. But just bear with me. I could be provocative in what I'm suggesting, but again, what I'm really suggesting is that developing our capability to make partnership with Māori is where it is at. First of all, it's important that we understand the context, because this is where we start, this is where we begin. So the context, you may be well aware that there have been historical inequities that have occurred over the last 200 years since the Waitangi tribe, since the treaty was signed in 1840. And all these inequities have suggested that Māori have been left behind. They've been left behind in health, employment and business opportunities, only just to name a few. All of these need to be considered before beginning a journey of partnership. You can't ignore them. You have to understand that technologies haven't been evenly distributed, or the uptake by Māori has not necessarily been there, or has been sporadic when it has been there. Māori need to be considered through all phases of design, including the initial phase of what is the idea that they're wanting to develop. So unfortunately, Māori continue, even to this present age, of not actually being included. Partnership. So within MBIE, we have fully recognised and understood that the partnership that we are needing to demonstrate is now in legislation. So many of you that are in agencies will know that we have now got the Public Service Act of 2020, which now says that we have to demonstrate that our partnership. And obviously the other question is, how are we going to measure that? And so measurement actually becomes quite an important part of it. And just how the last speaker was talking about equity, this is now going to be measured through the regulatory system, not necessarily through the service delivery. So what I mean by that is that when the legislation comes into being and policy is implemented into that, then what happens is that we determine where in the system Māori are present and where they're not. And are they present in the same proportions to the population? And if they're not, we ask the question, why not? And then we look at the services that are being delivered and how we can change those services to enable Māori to be more inclusive in those services. So access to transport for Māori is a key enabler for social, cultural and economic well-being, and this is even more so for Māori in these situations. No longer do we measure our wealth according to our GDP, we now measure it according to well-being, and that's about how Māori are included in the system and not excluded from it. However, what we've become to realise within Māori communities, that where we have low emission options, they seem to be incentivising the wealthy and are not evenly distributed amongst the population. So Māori are often losing out. They often are in lower incomes. They can't afford a Tesla. They can't afford to park in the Tesla spaces, which is right up front if you go into the malls. They have older car fleets, and it's quite difficult for them to be able to get into the lower emission economy. Yet, arguably, Māori are disproportionately paying for more of the infrastructure through road taxes, because they have more cars that are likely to be petrol and they're likely to be older than when they were designed and developed. So there you go. There's lots of inequities, and you can keep looking through the magnifying glass at all the options where there are inequities, and they do exist. So the question then is, how can we work with Māori? And so I'm just suggesting of a few ideas of better ways of working with Māori, and what it really comes down to is being able to develop the capability of a Te Ao Māori perspective, so that you will be able to engage with Māori on their terms, and not the other way round, which is what has happened to date. This may start with te reo lessons, and within MB, all the management are required to go to do te reo lessons. It then might lead on to developing single pilots that actually just engage with Māori communities. And then, on a larger scale, we may be able to incorporate Māori worldviews into larger projects. And so that's the trajectory and the pathway upon which partnership has been determined. So we really need to take an authentic partnership approach. This is where you understand the Māori community's needs are distinctly different from the rest of the community, and they require a uniquely different approach. No longer can we simply transfer Western science into a te ao Māori perspective and expect them to uptake and to be able to buy Tesla cars and run around in them and have their options open and enabled for them. In many situations, for example, within Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, you could have a family that might be living in Mangere, but the kura kaupapa, which is the school for Māori, isn't available in that area, and they have to travel all the way to Glen, which is quite a 20-30 kilometre distance. So they can't get a school within the area, so they can't rely on that public transport. And to get from there to Glen, it would be going into the city and then from the city outwards. And so there's lots of complicated transport options that they have to consider, because often if they don't have a car, then they have to share with somebody, because it's the idea of the whānau being able to make sure that everybody gets to where they want to get to. So maybe the idea of individualised car ownership doesn't necessarily always exist within Māori communities. So getting back to partnership, and sorry if I'm keeping on reiterating this, the idea right at the beginning needs to be conversed with Māori. And so if you're thinking of working with Māori communities, then it's important to understand what their fundamental needs are before going in with a preconceived idea. And that's really important. And I've seen too many different projects that have occurred by government agencies who have gone in thinking, we know what you want, we know what you need, and you just need to adopt this. And if you adopt this, it's going to answer all your problems. And often what has happened is it's been a huge mess, and I often are having to clean up that mess afterwards. And one example is, if we're looking about Māori travel behaviours, then we need to understand why Māori are travelling and what is their purpose behaviour in their mobility. You know, is it going to a kura in Glen, or is it taking Nani up to Tautokoro and Whangarei, because that's where her marae is, and that's where they go back for their tangi. So you have to understand why they're going to these specific areas before you decide what the answers are for them. And the answers for them is probably for Māori by Māori. They have the solutions to their own problems, and it's about working along with those as much as possible. So within Te Whakatairanga, which is the enablement and engagement section within MB, we're currently developing the capability development of the whole workforce. And so I mentioned before that there's te reo lessons, there is project management that's infusing Māori approach. So the whole project management approach is changing, and we're looking at different ways that we can include Māori in that project management approach. And a key enabler for that is the Wawata Māori strategy, which we've been developing, which is signalling that we have to position ourselves right before we actually start a partnership. We have to design and build collaboratively. We have to recruit Māori We have to recruit people with the right skills, including Māori, within our government agencies. We have to enable their aspirations to come true, and we have to measure right, which is using the equity measures, the impact measures over the whole of the regulatory system. So another way that this is going to be enabled is that the New Zealand government procurement, we're looking at partnering with Te Puni Kōkiri and looking at ways that we can work together to enable the aspirations of Māori to be more fully realised. So this is actually quite at large scales, and it's about developing employment skills in that space. So some of the areas that we could be going into is be looking at kāinga ora and looking at ways that Māori could be learning and developing their skills within those spaces, which is very important. So the idea as time progresses is that this will become more and more a part of the way that procurement occurs within the New Zealand government procurement system. And you know, if you have achieved the goal of partnership, if it is able to deliver equity for Māori. So the same proportions in the population are evidenced in your project as well. Oops. So I was brought back to something that my husband said the other day, and this was by Martin Luther King. It's not actually about separatism, it's about going forward, and this is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King: if we are to move on in the days ahead and bring into being a truly integrated society, we must recognise that our destinies are tied together. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Puti, would you be open to some questions if there are some?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Look, fascinating area of conversation. So, I think, profound for us in Aotearoa at the moment. There must be some questions around the room, or there may well be. But up the back here. Cheers, Nick.
Great presentation, thank you. How well represented are Māori in decision making in New Zealand at the moment, or in policy setting? Because that would seem to probably help.
That's a really good question, and basically from the evidence, if they're not being involved all the way through the development, it's very unlikely that they're involved. They're also not involved in the decision making as well, which is very problematic. But rather than going straight to decision makers and putting more Māori on boards, what I'm suggesting is actually more of an iterative approach, and that we just have to start with our own capability in developing that, and through that we will develop more authentic partnerships. But good question.
Hi Puti, thanks for that. You mentioned Maori travel behaviour. I was just wondering whether there's been what you know about that, whether there's what research you know about that, anything?
I think it's very much an undeveloped territory space at the moment, because there's been a lot of assumptions that Māori travel behaviour is the same as non-Māori, and because of that, that's how there have been the development of systems that actually haven't worked for Māori, because they don't recognise the difference. So very, very little at this stage, but there are, I see Waka Kotahi has some funding opportunities that could be looking at that. So that's quite encouraging, but it's still very much in its embryonic stage at the moment.
Thanks, Puti. I was looking in our own backyard, and Australian First Nations people have a 2.7 times higher rate of road fatalities than others. Is that similar here with the Maori, do you know?
Yes, that's quite a complex area, particularly with young Māori males, between those ages that we all know about. I think it's 15 to 24. There's a lot of risk taking that occurs, which occurs in many different groups as well. And I suppose we need to consider why that risk-taking is occurring, and it's occurring within a cultural context. We can't take it out of that context and simply say, if we treat them all the same and give them a lot of counselling, are they going to change their behaviour? The answer is within the context in which they live.
Yeah, certainly, I guess, building on your point too, if we develop ISA or other in-car solutions that might attend to speed, it's got to consider their point of view and their backgrounds as well.
Absolutely, very much a part of the process.
Very cool. Last opportunity for a question, folks, as I make my way back through. Then we've got one over here, coming to you, sir. Thanks, everybody, for moving your legs. Do appreciate it.
Thank you. Quick question. You mentioned that you need to clean the mess. If you don't mind to explain to what sort of issues you're facing, just to understand, really.
Oh, can you just tell me the context of what I said?
You were saying that you need to come and clean the mess because Māori is not involved in the decision-making process, and if you don't mind explaining.
Okay,
just
so
to
there's a lot of situations where there's a lot of goodwill from different agencies as well as consultants who are saying, oh, actually, if we just, give Māori, I'm just making up this example, if we give them 10 Teslas, they'll, it'll solve all their problems. And it doesn't. And so what happens is quite a perverse outcome often comes out. And those perverseness often don't seem to be associated with what actually happened in that particular situation. But what happens is there is, for example, in some situations, you might get someone publicly speaking that they're actually working in partnership with Māori and be talking about it in a forum such as this, but they didn't actually get the permission to talk about it. And so it creates a whole lot of angst, and it's all based on there's a lack of trust because that trust hasn't been developed in the beginning. So I wouldn't look at the issues that are happening that come out of that. I'll be looking at the mistrust that actually started in the beginning.
So interesting. Puti, thank you so much. Once more, Puti Wilson. Thank you very much indeed. Kia ora. Folks, it is panel time. To take us through to our afternoon break, we've got an amazing panel. I've had a conversation with the team about it. Honestly, it promises to be a bit of a live wire of a session, and I, for one, am excited. I think you will be too. Looking at delivering on the promise of mobility as a service, can I please welcome Beca's wonderful Mark Gregory to the stage with his panelist. Mark will introduce the panel and get things kicked off for you. I'll be back at the end to round things out. Thank you so much. Let's hear it for Mark. It's a big thing to facilitate this.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kia ora. Just wait for our panellists to make their way to the stage. Excellent. Okay. So welcome to TTEC 2022 and to our panel about mobility as a service. This room is full of a number of different people, all associated with mobility for our communities. We're a very, very diverse group, and in fact that's been reinforced over the last 2 or 3 days about the diversity of this sort of sector that we work in. There are, however, a number of commonalities within what we're trying to achieve. The first of which I would suggest is about providing mobility for our communities. No matter what we do as a day job, it could be reflected back to ensuring that our community can get about when they want to, when they need to. There are 3 themes that we've had crop up as part of this conference, and they've been reinforced through previous speakers. 2 of them have 0 in their title. The first is the drive to the reduction in road toll on our roads, the road to 0. The second one is about the goal of sustainability and the reduction in carbon in all that we do. And the third theme that has come through is around equitable transport. The challenges that some of our lower decile communities face around transport, we've just heard an example of that now, and our role as mobility managers in what we do to facilitate that. There is one approach, whilst not a silver bullet, would seem to be a great solution to resolving that, but it hasn't yet kicked on. And that's what we're here as a panel largely to discuss. So I'll just introduce our panel members, and then I'll get into the format of this panel. So, introduction, you've just heard from me. We'll be exploring 3 main questions that I'll put to each of the panellists in turn. But before we get into that, I'll introduce them. Those that are observant and of a mathematical bent will come to see that there's 4 panellists, not 5. So we'll get that out the way now. Mishko sends his apologies, but he couldn't be with us today. Nevertheless, we've got a great collection of people on the panel here. So, first of all is Kirsten. Kirsten is co-founder. Second? Oh. No, you're not kicking off. I'm introducing you. Oh, okay. Sorry.
I thought you were going down the line.
I'm working down my list. This is going to be fun. So I should say, actually, we've been having various phone catch-ups, and it's been a jolly old affair, so I'm quite looking forward to the dynamic here. So first, second, or third, Kirsten, wherever we put you. You're the co-founder and director of Zilch, which is an EV mobility as a service business, along with Carbon Group Holdings, which is a green fleet consulting and finance business. We're also joined, and I'm going to avoid numbering this, we've got Kevin. Kevin is the Group Manager, Customer and Digital Experience at AT. You're responsible for leading a step change in the design and execution of customer and digital experiences. In the middle-ish, so we don't get too particular, we've got Frederick, who made a cameo appearance earlier with his e-scooter. Yeah. So Frederick is the expansion manager for Beam and is a passionate transport and sustainability specialist. Anyone that's heard Frederick speak at these sort of events recently, you'll know that he's passionate about the topic and is a challenger to the status quo. And finally, not last but not least, we have Joe. Joe's worked on an understanding and optimizing how people interact. Shall I slow down so you've got your notes? Emerging technologies of 20 years, both here and in New Zealand. So we will be answering 3 main questions this afternoon. Please chime in if you have any others. The idea of a panel is an interactive thing. It's not about us transmitting to you, it's an interactive experience. So please yell out. So, no further ado, you don't want to hear me chattering. Let's hear from the experts. So question 1 is, how do we get MaaS working? Who should play what role? Please kick off, Joe. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Joe Chang, tako inua. I'm going to start off with a disclaimer. And that disclaimer is, for the purpose of this panel, I'm going to take a position that any MaaS solution that we implement should be a government-led initiative with collaboration with others. And I want to say the disclaimer part is that this isn't Waka Kotahi's position, and it's not necessarily my position either, but we kind of want to have a panel where we don't all agree, and I don't think that anybody else is going to take this position. So, I think the first question we need to really ask is what would be the purpose of MaaS? Why would we want to even implement it within the New Zealand context? And if we look internationally with MaaS implementations, there's a whole lot of different definitions of what it actually is. There's a whole lot of different configurations of who should play what role. And there's probably more of those definitions than there are actual implementations. And with those implementations that we've seen, there's a growing number of them. But when you look at the data and you start to ask, you know, what categorical statements can we make about how MaaS would be useful and what it would be useful for? There's not a lot of long-term trials that are a wide range as well. So what we need to do is look at what would be best for New Zealand, which means that we need to have some type of a bespoke approach. And we kind of talked about this internally, and it's kind of like your mother's, your daughter's, cousin's, sister's version of MaaS that is probably going to be what's best fit for New Zealand. So from a Waka Kotahi perspective, the outcomes that we are trying to achieve within the transport system, I think have already been talked about over the last couple of days, but they're in the areas of inclusive access, healthy and safe people, environmental sustainability, resilience and economic prosperity. Alongside those, we've got the emissions reduction that we've talked about before, road to zero targets and other strategic priorities. And I'm going to use just one of those areas to explain why this should be a government-led design of mobility as a solution implementation for New Zealand. So the one I'm going to look at is inclusive